This is Michael Popok, Legal AF After Dark. Rudy Giuliani stands on trial for defamation, not on the liability side, but just over how big of a check that jury in the District of Columbia is going to write in favor of Ruby Freeman and Shaye, the mother, daughter, former election workers in Fulton County, Georgia, who were horribly, viciously, relentlessly defamed by Rudy Giuliani and others. But now it's time for him to pay the piper. That jury is out. They have not yet ruled. Now's a great time for you to figure out and get updated by Karen Friedman, Agnifilo, and I on the most recent edition of Legal AF. Take a listen. To finish our podcast talking about Rudy Giuliani.
Right.
Oh, he is right. And so I'll give 1 minute. I'll turn it over to you for 3 or 4, and then we'll call our Legal AF today a show. Rudy has gotten sanctioned so many times by Beryl Howell with both ends of the stick. I don't think he knows if he's coming or going. Even his own lawyer, Joe Sibley, had to confess to the judge, not in front of the jury, that his client is losing it. He literally said in response to a question from the judge, when the judge said, "I understand that your client was out on the courthouse steps denying everything that he has to admit as true, and I've already ruled upon. What is going on?" And he said, "Judge, he's 80 years old. I think this is taking a lot out of him." In other words, Rudy's lost his fastball, and he can't make decisions. And then he said, "I can't control him. The issue is I can't control him." Because she said to Joe Sibley, who's the latest in long line of trial lawyers, for some reason lining up to represent Rudy Giuliani, he said to the jury, to try to curry favor with them, let's be honest, he said, "Ruby Freeman and Shaye are very nice people. They did not deserve to have happened to them what's happened to them. It's just not my guy's fault." Yes, he you'll hear from the judge that he defamed them and falsely said that they committed voter fraud and 2 million people jumped all over them as a result, but it wasn't their fault. To which Ruby Freeman said in her testimony, he was driving the bus and everybody was just jumping on board. And so he should not be able just to say, "I'm not responsible for what other people do," which I thought was a very eloquent way to put that. So he said to the jury that, and then the next day, or at the end of the first day of trial, Rudy Giuliani said, "I didn't do any of it. It's all a lie. There'll be proof one day. They did that fraud, that voter fraud." And the judge got wind of it because there's a video, which we played on the MeidasTouch network. And the judge said, "What is going on?" And then, of course, the lawyers, see, here's what's going on from the Popok perspective. There's a race going on that we're watching. And it's a race against Rudy Giuliani's either crazy as a fox or he's just batshit crazy. And the plaintiff's lawyers, who like their jury, want to get done with their case and have the jury write a big check for $50 million or more, want to outrace Giuliani's attempts, inadvertent or otherwise, to mistry this case. And so Rudy's saying things that he's not supposed to say, that the judge has ordered him not to say, that is perjurious, that's perjury, and the judge has warned the lawyer about it. And so if I'm on the other side, and I've been in cases, Karen, in civil, where things were going really well for me, but not great for a co-defendant, and they weren't really prepared either, and they didn't like the jury, and I loved the jury, and they wanted a mistrial. And a couple things happened that I ignored because they were mistrial technically, but I didn't want a mistrial until one time something happened in one of my trials, and the judge said, "Mr. Popok," for those that know Judge Bartel in Florida, that's Judge Bartel, "Mr. Popok, will there be a motion on that?" And I was like, "Oh, Jesus, I don't want to have to do this." And so we had a whole thing, and I convinced the judge not to mistry the case because I don't want it mistrial. And then I got a great result. Here, same thing. These lawyers don't want a mistrial, and they're willing to put up with a level of crazy by Giuliani to try to stop this case and start all over again because he doesn't like the jury. He's not going to like any jury, but he doesn't like the jury, and he thinks that bad things are happening, make them happen really, really slow. And so that's the race we're watching right now. If I were the plaintiff's counsel, hurry up. Yes, give Ruby Freeman and Shaye all the time in the world. But if you have a point made, don't bring in 5 more witnesses to make the same point. Move on. Close your case. Let the defense do whatever limited thing they can do, and then get to that jury. Because otherwise, we're going to be doing this all over again 3 months from now. With Rudy maybe in jail, because he's perjured himself on the stand and violated court orders. What are you making of where they are right now on day 3? I'm exhausted telling this story about Rudy Giuliani, and he's 3 days into his trial.
Yeah, no, this is, look, he thinks he's Donald Trump. He thinks he wants to be Donald Trump. He thinks he can, say one thing in court and then walk outside and just say whatever he wants and have nothing happen to him. And that's one of the problems with Donald Trump, who keeps doing that and no one holds him to account, right? I mean, yes, there are gag orders now, but no one, anyone else, and we've said this so many times, anyone else, any other criminal defendant who acted like Donald Trump and did these things would have been put in, would have been incarcerated pending trial and would not have been allowed to get away with this. But since he does get away with it constantly, and he does it all the time, I think it sends the message to Rudy, who wants to be Donald Trump and, is completely enamored by him and is going to go down with the ship to the end. And, so that's what I think he thought he could just go and say whatever he wants outside of court and have nothing happen. But thank God, Judge Beryl Howell is a real judge. She's, very, very, very smart and, just a fantastic judge, is not going to let him get away with it and is going to let Shaye Moss and Ruby Freeman have their day in court. And at the end of the day, Giuliani is kind of a clown, and there's so many things he's done that you can talk about, with the hair dye running down his face, and he looks kind of pathetic and old and whatever, but I'm sorry, I think he's actually kind of evil. And when you are reminded of what he said about them and what it has done to their life, and when they testified at trial, I think Ruby Freeman was the only one who testified today so far. It was absolutely, you're just reminded again of how horrific and dangerous what Giuliani did and is still doing today, when he went outside of court and said the same thing. And, it is absolutely just, they deserve all of his money and every other thing they can get from him, because of what he did and said to them and what the consequences were. And, look, the jurors were shown these racially charged threats, that they received after Giuliani made the accusations that he's still making. And, they did a very much like Giuliani said this, and then right after, we got emails flooding our inbox and talking about lynching and the KKK. And one email came from an account called The Grand Wizard and said, the safest place for you is prison or you'll swing from the trees. Another said her daughter, she should hang from the Capitol Dome. And, I pray I'm sitting close enough to hear your neck snap. Right? People began showing up at her house and she had to call the police, while people were banging on her door while she was on the phone with the police. I mean, at one point, those are like, when you hear that, that is just utterly chilling. And, it's these things have consequences on real people. And I'm so grateful and thankful that finally that is coming out in a court of law under oath. They'll be cross-examined, whatever it is. And they get their day in court. We get to hear about it and reminded of what it was. And he is going to face the music. I wish Donald Trump was a defendant as well, and he deserves to be here. Freeman showed that the USB drive, that he accused her of passing, that was a ginger mint, right? Yeah, I think you're on mute, Popok. It was a ginger mint, and right. She actually gave one to the judge, and she says, yeah. And she passed one to the judge, who said she's going to use it. It's just really sad. She said she used to go by Lady Ruby, that was what her name was. But she said, she can't go by that anymore. She says, I don't know who I am anymore. This is real. The consequences here are real. And, I'm glad that there's no mistrial. I think as a matter of precedent, I don't think a defendant should be allowed to cause his own mistrial. I think that's bad precedent, because for the reasons you said, but also, look, that would incentivize, if they don't like the jury that they got or the judge's ruling, what are they going to do? They're going to, do whatever, try to cause his own mistrial. So I'm glad that that did not happen and isn't happening. And I hope that they deserve everything.
Alex Jones tried to mistry his own case, and it didn't work, and got chastised along with the lawyers who violated court orders frequently in front of that jury to try to see what would happen. And I'll leave it on this. Beryl Howell is the right judge for the right time presiding over this case. She was the chief judge of the DC, all the DC courts of DC trial courts. She was the one administratively that made sure that all the Jan 6 defendants were tried and how they were tried. She also presided over the secret grand juries and the grand jury process. She's the one that made all the rulings that stripped all of the attorney-client privilege away from Donald Trump's lawyers and forced them to testify and turn over their documents. She knows Jan 6 and things related to it inside and out. In fact, she said to Joe Sibley, the lawyer for Rudy Giuliani, how can you, given the fact that the Georgia, it shows you how much she knows from presiding and just being a carbon-based human, she said, given that the Georgia Bureau of Investigation, Secretary of State of Georgia investigative unit, all looked into this and cleared Ruby Freeman and Shaye Moss, how can your client say those things out loud? And wouldn't it be perjury if he took the stand here? So this is going to be a high wire act, white knuckles for Joe Sibley. I don't feel sorry for him. I'm just giving you where he's at. It's like that old Snickers commercial. Not going anywhere. It's time for a Snickers bar. To see Rudy elbowing him to take the stand, Rudy is not going to follow the script. He's not going to follow the judge's prior orders in the case. He's going to violate it. And then we're going to be in the world that you described, Karen, which is, can you mistry your own case? If I'm the plaintiffs, knowing that they have the jury probably firmly in their hands, especially after I got choked up preparing a hot take about Shaye Moss's testimony. That's how powerful it was. I had to clear my eyes to do the hot take. That, you can imagine what's the impact on a jury. Okay, so they know they got this jury and they know they're going to get a huge check. I think it could be more than the 50 million they asked for, 43 million tops. I think it could be 60 million. And they want to get to that jury verdict as quickly as possible. And I agree with you, the public policy against having a defendant try to throw over the game board because he doesn't like it, and let's try it again. You'll never get a trial done. And he could be, and now some people are saying, why does he have to be in the courtroom at all? He doesn't. And if he continues, especially civilly, if he continues to violate the court's orders, he can be bound, gagged, removed, and precluded from his own trial and tried in absentia effectively on the measure, on the amount of damages. And that's, he's heading for that quickly.
And didn't the judge find already defamation, but not on the merits, but as a sanction?
No, both. And I misspoke myself on a hot take. She did both. She found as a sanction because of all his violations of her various orders that he was going to be found in default and defaulted him on the issue of liability. But she also found as a matter of law that what he said about them was defamatory. And so it was sort of a twin order, and which is good for appellate purposes. And then only issue is for the jury to decide is punitive damages and actual damages. And if you were, for our audience, she's giving the jury another instruction at the appropriate time before they deliberate, that they are to assume that Rudy Giuliani was hiding his assets and hiding his financials from the plaintiff in order to lower his financial net worth in front of them when they made their decision on how big of a punitive damage award. They are to assume, based on an instruction by the judge that'll come before deliberation, as a penalty that she put on Rudy Giuliani for prior court violations and his failure to turn over documents about how much money he makes on his podcast, how much money he makes in his consulting fees, and how much money he makes on the internet, whatever, his sources of income. He didn't do it. So now she's telling the jury, you were to assume that he's lying to you. He's lowering his net worth in order for you to write a lower check.
That's a beautiful jury charge. Oh, but how does she keep him from hiding that? Like, if, like, say they get awarded the money, how do they get the money without him squirreling it away?
It's called discovery and aid of execution. So the people that get the piece of paper called the judgment. Well, by the way, I'm not mansplaining you. I'm just doing our normal explanation.
Yeah, no. I want.
It's not you. It's not you. It's me. I'm thinking, does this look good? I'm telling her this stuff.
I love learning this stuff.
I know. They get a judgment, and then when I get a judgment, I then have to go get the money. And you're entitled to discovery and aid of execution, which means you get to put that person in a chair. He has to turn over all of his assets, bank statements, checking account, offshore. If he lies, it's a crime. He'll go to jail, which is the other penalty here. And if he doesn't show up, he can go to jail. If he doesn't want to go to the deposition. Oh, he'll be in jail until he gives them what they want at that point. And then, he's got the apartment on the Upper East Side of New York. He's got the condo down in Florida. He makes money. He can garnish his wages until he pays off the $60 million or more judgment. But We'll follow it. There'll be so much. Ben and I'll pick up on some on Saturday's edition of Legal AF, but that trial will be going on next week. And you and I will follow up with that and on hot takes that we've been doing all along the way about every hour here on the MeidasTouch Network.
Thanks so much for watching. We're only a few subscribers short of 2 million subs. Please subscribe right now to the MeidasTouch YouTube channel for free and help us grow this unapologetically pro-democracy network.